Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again for our weekly Hebrew word study. Apologize for taking a break last week, but appreciate all of you who were praying for my dad while he was in the hospital. He's home and doing much better. So sorry for the break, but glad to be back again and glad that all things worked out as God answers prayer for his healing and deliverance from the illness he went through. So we are back today. We are in 1 Samuel chapter 27, starting a new chapter. And if you remember from 2 weeks ago, David had his encounter with Saul, and Saul made a prophetic utterance that David would prevail, he would one day be king, and then it's kind of disturbing or disheartening, I guess, when we come to chapter 27 to see that after David had been delivered from Saul's hand by the grace of God, that David would kind of drop back into despondency, despair, even a depression, if you will. And so when we look at the start of chapter 27, we see David saying in his heart, verse 1, that I'm going to perish. Now, this word perish is kind of interesting. Um, the word perish is a little strong. Um, it really means that you'll be swept up or snatched away. I guess the translators took it to a little bit more, I don't know, deeper level, not deeper in study, but more harsh level of thinking that David was fearing for his life, and I guess he was, but he was looking about being swept away by the hand of Saul. And then he says here, Litov ki hamalet. It's not, there's nothing better for me than I should speedily escape to the land of the Philistines. This is really disheartening again because remember last time we had our session, David's concern was that he was being sought after by Saul in the wilderness, and he was away from the city of Shiloh, where the Ark of the Tabernacle was, and David's desire was to get to the Ark of the Tabernacle. Well, what's going on here? Why is David even seemingly sinking deeper in his despondency? And now he's not only running from Saul and away from Shiloh, where the tabernacle is, he's going to leave Israel. And again, the significance of this is maybe lost on us in our 21st century, but back then you were leaving God's promised land. You were leaving God's protection. You were leaving, all of his providence and provision. And so what's David doing here? And so David is running to the Philistines, and not just anywhere in the Philistines. He's going to the city of Gath. We're going to see, remember Goliath? Where'd he come from? Goliath of Gath. So verse 2 is kind of an interesting little intersection here in insertion that David arose with his 600 men who were with him, and he went to the land of Gath, where the king of Gath was. I find this quite interesting that he's going to the city where the giant came from. Remember, Goliath had four brothers. That's why David took five smooth stones, because it was Goliath plus four brothers. So obviously they would have remembered what David did. Why why would he go there? No words right now, nothing in the commentaries, no explanation, but you can kind of see that David is just on a little bit of a spiral downward path here. Somehow they didn't, weren't they were suspicious. We'll find that in some later verses, but he was able to dwell at Gath with the king Achish, and his men were there with him, and David and his two wives, Ahinoam and Abigail. But then we get to verse 4. This is just incredible. I almost passed over it because it doesn't show up in the English translations like this. But then when I was looking at the Hebrew here, find something really, really interesting. You'll see verse 4 in front of you, and we pick up verse 4, Vayugad Leshaul Ki, and then there's the word Varach David, Gath, Velo. And then you see these words in brackets and parentheses. This is called a kere and a ketiv, meaning, you know, that there's something going on here with the Hebrew text that the Masoretes who put in the vowel pointings were a little disturbed over and didn't quite know what to do. The first word is in the brackets, which is what is written. The second word, which is in the parentheses, is what has been understood. As they taught this, they didn't quite know what to put here, so they wrote what they thought it was. Either they felt maybe the original text had a misspelling or a word that was not useful anymore. And so that's where this, what is written, what is understood, little phrase came into play. Also looking at the end of this verse is a summik, which is a punctuation point. Um, Again, you don't find that carried over in the English, but it is a point to where the writers want you to stop and think about what you just read. Well, verse 4 doesn't seem to have anything profound in it in the English, but looking at the Hebrew, we're going to take a couple side paths, if you will, and we see that this word barach sounds a lot like the word barak, which is to bless or to praise or to be blessed. And so that stopped me. So I wanted to look up the word barak, and when we unpack this in Bible Hub, it says to go or to flee. But yet, it just intrigued me, so I wanted to look it up a little bit more. So I want to take a look at the Yastro's Targumim, and we see here that this word really means a breakthrough. Yes, in the Hiphil, cause to flee or drive out, exclude, but this is not in a Hiphil form. This is in a Cal form. So the meaning would really be that there's a breakthrough or a pass through. So something is happening in David's life that, you know, normally we think of a breakthrough as always being a good thing, you know, that you have gone from something bad and broke through into something better. But David is kind of doing this in reverse, that this is a passing through. Because look at the wording here. It talks about, literally, it says that um, break or pass through David Gath. Gat. There's no to gat, there's no preposition in front of this, and so this is just really strange. They obviously made this to read because when you read the rest of the chapter, obviously the context takes over, and yes, the in a simple form, it's just describing, you know, David going to Gath, and the rest of the story will continue later on. But I think there's another level we can look at here. I'm not going to say this is anybody's interpretation but mine, but what I find really interesting here is the word for Gath is really the word that means wine press. Yes, it is a city, but it's also a wine press. What is a wine press in ancient Israel? It's not made out of wood. It's not something that, as we know today, but the archaeological evidence that they've dug up shows that wine presses were pits in the ground. They were depressions that were dug, and they would throw the grapes in, stomp them with their feet. There was a hole in the bottom that would drain out into another container, and they would gather the juice. So could it be that David's passing through, and this word Gath is a pit, it's a depression, it's a deep well. And that's what brings me to that thought when I come to this next word, because the word is Yud, Vav, Samek, and a Pe Sofit, which is pronounced Yosef. And it doesn't take much imagination when you think that that's the word Joseph. Well, what's the word Joseph doing in here? Obviously, the translators had no clue either, so they put in the word Yasaf, which translated as he, but Yasaf really means to add. And Joseph's name is based upon the word of to add. And so this just piqued my curiosity, and I started thinking, well, what connection could there be here between what David was doing and anything in the life of Joseph? And that's where the word Gath, being a wine press, um, and that David was kind of transitioning or falling, if you will, into this pit, very similar to Joseph being thrown in the pit for his brothers. And I look at this maybe in a little different context, that this was kind of a spiral downward path that David was taking, a very low point in his life. And we're going to see that as we continue this chapter. And I believe that maybe there's just a little hidden message here that the writers wanted to give us an illustration, saying how what David was going through was very similar to what Joseph had gone through in his life when he was in the pit. His dreams were dashed. He had the dreams of being um, a ruler, having his mother and father and brothers bow down to him. And at the bottom of the pit, I think that that dream was very far from his mind, just like David having had the prophecy from Saul that he was going to prevail and rule. David sunk into this pit of despair and could not be pulled out of it at this time. And so I think that's where we see the comparison. It's fascinating verse here, fascinating bits that you won't find in the English translation, but that you do see in the Hebrew. And again, that's the beauty of it. Is anybody going to write a book about this, or is anybody going to change the commentaries? Probably not, but I hope you can see that there are depths and maybe mysteries, or maybe learning opportunities is a better understanding here of in God's Word that can be a little bit deeper than just the face value of the words themselves. And so we're going to leave you with that and with that thought. And I pray that you are just encouraged that God sees, God knows what you're going through, even if you maybe feel like you're in the bottom of a pit, like David felt or like Joseph felt, that God's deliverance is always close at hand. And we'll pick up on this next week and see how God rescues David out of this low situation that he's in. So have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. God bless you all, and hopefully see you next week. Bye bye.